The Huns began to straften, couldn't make it out at all. Especially when the tanks began the caterpillar crawl. And the tanks went on and they strolled along with an independent air. And their guns began to blare, and the Huns began to swear. But they pulled the trees up by the roots and made...
So, while 5 Company were off over there somewhere taking the village of Marconing, the rest of the battalion was actually leagued up here. Once it was safe, the supply tanks came up, refueled the tanks, and the tanks were checked over. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bryce, he came up with his personnel to supervise the reorganisation of the battalion, ready to move forward with the cavalry to take the other villages over towards the northwest. Have you ever seen Captain Blackadder? You know, the Rowan Atkinson series about the First World War. Do you remember the depiction of some of the officers in that Captain Blackadder? Well, here we have the Captain Blackadder moment. Colonel Bryce, he came forward and he planted the battalion flag in the ground. Just so happens there's a farmer's flag on a pole. Imagine that's yellow, and we're here in the Grand Ravine, so I couldn't resist putting the camera up here. So he planted the flag and declared that it was time for luncheon. So yeah, in the middle of the battle, Colonel Bryce decided it was time for luncheon. And the official battalion record states the following: by 11:30 hours, the tanks had reorganised and the crews took lunch outside the tanks. By 11:30, 3 spare tanks and 4 supply tanks had arrived. The group then waited all day for the cavalry to arrive. One of the junior officers here at the time, a Lieutenant Scruton, he actually put down to paper what actually happened with the lunch, and I'm going to quote on this one. He said, "I joined up with Lieutenant Colonel Bryce at his famous lunch party marked by his battalion yellow flag, which was a bit larger than the company commanders and the section commanders' flags. This was about 11 o'clock. After I had completed my section tasks on the 2nd German front lines, I was to rally there to act with the cavalry, if and when it should come up. Unfortunately, as you will know, in spite of messages sent back by runner, wireless and pigeon, they did not begin to arrive until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then only the scouts. Colonel Bryce's luncheon party consisted of his personal staff and a cavalry liaison officer besides myself. It is true that a white tablecloth and appropriate cutlery were spread out. Colonel Bryce, one of the bravest men I ever knew, loved good living and comfort." And with that, because I'm British, I am going to have myself in the middle of a farmer's field here in northeast France a well-deserved cup of tea. Cheers. here we are in the area where 5 Company were advancing towards Marconing. Over my left shoulder we've got the road from Ville-Pouchon to Marconing, and over my right shoulder in the distance you should be able to see the village of Marconing itself. 5 Company actually had 14 tanks at this time for the advance towards the village. The 2 tanks that had become ditched earlier in the day, they had now recovered and they were back with the unit. Down in the valley there, 2nd Lieutenant Thompson in B-22 Buccaneer was advancing when they came under attack from a machine gun nest. Because of that attack, the splinters from the bullets, they splintered on the inside of the tank, injuring 2 of his crew. He answered with the 6-pounder and silenced the machine gun nest. Then he continued on and actually reached the outskirts of the village at 10:40 and actually reached his objectives in the village by 11:10. Lieutenant Dolby in B-23 was also involved in this action, and he described what happened to him on the way to Marconing. About a quarter of a mile from Marconing, I caught up with the barrage, and while waiting was engaged from the left by 2 machine guns. We opened fire on these with the 6-pounder and dispersed the crew, wounding some. Driving up to the emplacement, we hoisted the guns onto the top of the tank and proceeded to the village. The barrage by that time having jumped to the east side of it. Striking the Marconing road, I moved up it, the ground on each side of it being rather bad. As everything was so quiet, I was driving with the front windows open, but on approaching the village, to within 10 yards of the first houses, we were received by a sudden burst of machine gun fire from an outhouse abutting the road. Being too close to bring the 6-pounders to bear on the building and not wishing to swing the tank, I gave orders to ram, which we managed most successfully, bringing the whole place down on the gun and its crew, and most effectively putting them out of action. Well, bit of an understatement, but sounds like a good tank commander to me. Anyway, B-23, they continued through Marconing and on towards the railway bridge, which was their objective. So, here we are, the railway bridge over the canal in Marconing. One of the final objectives of 5 Company, and what I'd like to do now is just read Lieutenant Dolby's account of actually how he got here. After silencing some more machine guns in 2 farmhouses with the port 6-pounder, we entered the village. It was about 10 o'clock. I was far in advance of the infantry and other tanks, with the exception of one of my own company, which was just in front. We encountered considerable resistance in the village, chiefly rifle fire from houses, but the 6-pounders, making huge holes in the walls, soon drove the Huns out, and we managed to bag a good many in the streets with our Lewis guns and revolvers. The other tank turned away to the right, and I did not see it for 2 hours. I struck the railway track and moved along its running lines and sleepers, and severely damaging the spuds on my track. The tanks had actually been fitted with sort of extenders to enable them to go over soft terrain, or what they thought, but of course running along the railway tracks, that would just completely smash them up. The line was on a high embankment and commanded the lower open ground on each side, over which the retiring enemy were running. My Lewis gunners had a very busy but enjoyable time now as we moved down towards the iron railway bridge over the canal. On reaching the bridge, I discovered 5 Huns rolling out a wire, one end of which disappeared into the pier of the bridge. It was essential to prevent these men joining the wires to the exploder, as the bridge intact was vital to us. Opening fire with my Port Lewis gun succeeded in hitting one and dispersing the others. I decided not to cross the bridge lest it was blown up behind us, which, as I was then unsupported, would have been decidedly awkward. 3 of us got out of the tank with the intention of cutting the wire, but my corporal was sniped in the arm, so we got him inside again and decided to keep the Huns off the wire by machine gun fire instead. So their tank must have been around here somewhere. They were on the railway sleepers coming down, and they were just short of the bridge. And on the other side of the canal, I can see through the trees here, there's still some houses and so on. So yeah, maybe back then in 1917 they would still be there as well. The enemy were sniping heavily now from houses on the eastern side of the village, across the river. And beyond the canal, we commenced a systematic bombardment with our 2 guns and managed to drive them out. I began casting anxious glances to the rear as our ammunition was running out. There were no signs of support. Lieutenant Dolby and his mate in the other tank, just with 2 tanks, they managed to suppress a counterattack with the Germans from around about this position. But at 12:20, just after midday then, the infantry came up and they managed to secure the bridge. So this has been a fantastic effort by everyone from B Battalion, but especially the Lieutenant Dolby. And once the infantry had actually come up and secured the town, 5 company, they all actually moved just to the west of the town to the predefined rally point, which was near the old French cemetery.